Hello gorgeous people, how are you all doing today? I hope you're well. Now I know from messages and comments that a few of you have recently been somewhat under the weather, so I hope you're recovering and post-surgery, all that kind of stuff, yeah, feel better soon. I'm okay. Oh, I feel a bit, I feel like I could go back to bed this morning. It's getting on for lunchtime. It's another at-home day. I woke up this morning to see snow on the roofs. It was so pretty. I knew we had been forecast to have snow last night, so it's in the back of my mind anyway. But when I woke up this morning, I knew it straight away from the quality of light. Not from the quality of sound, because it's not really sticking, so down on the pavements and on the road it hadn't stuck, so that the sound hadn't changed but the light had, and I jumped out of bed like, oh, it's so pretty. It won't last, it's not going to stick, but that's because we've gone cold again. We've gone really quite chilly. We're back below freezing. Where are we? End of the first week of March. We're not quite into spring yet. I think we've got a whole week of rain or something like that. A week, 10 days of rain. I keep thinking about the garden and wanting to get on, but in this weather, there's no point. Rain, drizzle, sleet, snow. I'm just looking out of the kitchen window. It started to snow again. But like I say, it's not going to stick, and I think in the next couple of days it is going to warm up. So it's just going to be rain rather than snow. Anyway, gosh, that was a bit long-winded, wasn't it? So yeah, here I am on the sofa again. This has been... I promise I have moved a couple of times, but yeah, this, for the last 3 days, this is... Welcome to my office. This is my office. There's plenty of space for some co-workers here if you want to come and join me. I have been sewing like mad. I always forget how, I'm just thinking out loud, I suddenly thought maybe I should write this down in my creatives book, about how long the different processes take, because I always forget when it's something like, I'm talking about the lavender bags, of course. Excuse me, I've got a hot drink waiting, but it's too hot, I can't wait for it. Because I only do it once a year, I forget. I forget how long things take. But yeah, so I'm doing all the hand sewing. I can't reach to show you any. The last ones, can you hear? They're in the plastic crafting crate down here. So nearly there. But yeah, it's taken an absolute age. But it's such. I just love this work. I love it so much. Couple of days ago I did a 12-hour stint. 12 hours, literally just sitting here hand sewing. I stopped, I'm lying, it wasn't 12 hours, it was 11 and a half hours, because I stopped about, I don't know, it's about 3:30, 4 o'clock. I suddenly thought, oh, I'm a bit hungry. I've got some soup out of the freezer, it was in the fridge, so brilliant, lovely quick lunch, bowl of soup. I had a crust of some bread with it. Oh, it's lovely. Had my lunch, carried on till 10:30 that night. So that's quite a long work day, because I also had done stuff beforehand, but the point I'm making is, it's just so lovely. I started off my session, I was listening to a bit of music. And the good thing is, so what I try to do when I've got a session like that is, at least once an hour, I kind of think of it as like, oh, do it on the hour. Get up, have a stretch, walk around, circulation, all that kind of stuff. But also because my neck and back get stiff, hunched over, wiggle my fingers a bit. Go over to the CD player, change the CD, and then later on I switched to the radio because I couldn't be bothered. I couldn't decide. I was going, oh, what should I play next? Just pop the radio on. But what a wonderful way to spend a day. You know, if you're not going to spend the day with friends, you know, kicking back, doing nothing, if you're going to spend a day working, what a lovely way to do it. Just so quiet, so still. And there were so many moments of sewing, I was thinking, I would sort of think or acknowledge how slow my heart rate was, how deep and easy my breathing was. It's like a 12-hour long meditation. Anyway, they're on the way. I am hoping that they'll go on sale this weekend. I know because I'll put a notice on Facebook. I'll probably mention it on Insta as well. But I know some of you don't do those platforms. So what I intend to do is do an announcement on the community button on YouTube. I always forget that that's there. But yeah, I'll put something on the community thing. Is it cool enough to have a sip from yet? Hang on. Oh, it's still piping hot. It's hot chocolate. I'm not going to tip it up to show you. What are you thinking of, Vivi? It's a liquid. Yeah, this is the kind of day that calls for hot chocolate. Once I finish talking to you, I'm going to get on with the last of the sewing. I did another chunk of sewing yesterday, and I think I've got 8 left to do, which will take about an hour and a half. I really wanted to get them finished yesterday, but my fingers felt they were really crampy after the super long session the day before. So never mind, yeah, I will finish them off. So I've got the blanket ready, I've got my hoodie ready, I've got my scarf ready, I've got the gloves on. I might even have to put the hoodie on in a second. I think because I was just rushing around a little bit before I turned the camera on. That's warmed me up. Obviously, I'm thermaled up to the eyeballs. I kind of would have thought that by March I'd be out of my thermals, but no. And I suppose that also that sort of shows me just how much in the past, without even thinking about it, I just go and turn the heating on. So you know what? It's not been pleasant, but the one thing I have learned is that maybe I put the heating on. I mean, I was going to say maybe I put it on too easily in the past. I've always put an extra layer on. I've always done that thing we were taught when we were kids. You know, you'd say, "Mom, I'm cold. Put another jumper on." But yeah, it'll be interesting for me to just in terms of my own behaviour when we come to next winter. Let's say by some miracle that our fuel prices drop right back to, you know, the prices 2 years ago. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just say it did. Would I go back to having my heating on for hours and hours at a time during winter? You know, when you work from home, obviously if I wasn't at home I wouldn't have the heating on, but if I'm working from home I'd have the heating on most of the day. Would I go back to that habit if the prices came down, or would I you know, be living in my thermals and my gloves all winter and saying, no, not putting the heating on, not just yet? I would want to have it on more than it has been on this winter. That's for sure. I haven't enjoyed this winter from that point of view. None of us have we? Anyway, that's all a major digression before we even started. Just responding to this new bit of cold we're having. So this hot chocolate, oh, sorry, I'm slurping, that's so rude, isn't it? This is the one from Sandy. So I've tried a few now. Remember, so many lovely gifts of hot chocolate over Christmas. And was it Diane or Diana? Sorry, I can't remember if it was Diane or Diana. The Marks and Spencer's one, and they were in sort of individual sachets, which would be great for popping in your bag for taking to work. They were gorgeous, yum yum yum. This is from Sandy. This is that big, I think it's like a catering pack Well, it's going to cater to me for the year. It's good old Cadbury's, so it's a milk hot chocolate. And I've got the one from Joanne, hey gorgeous, it's a darker chocolate. The difference is as well, this is made with water, the M&S one was made with water, so, you know, quick and easy. The one from Joanne, when I try that, I will share that with you as well, but I think that one needs to be made with milk, so I'll get some oat milk rather than I'll get some shop bought oat milk rather than use my own. If you didn't see that video, I was showing a video where I make my own oat milk for my porridge in the morning, which is a fraction. I think it worked out like something crazy like 5p a litre, whereas in the shops now it's about £1 is probably the cheapest you can get at a litre. And I was saying it works great for porridge, but it doesn't work really well in hot drinks for some reason. It's still a little bit gritty because I don't have a nut bag. But that grittiness in the porridge, you don't really notice it because the porridge. So maybe it would do for making hot chocolate. I don't know. But maybe as a treat I'll just shop bought. Anyway. I've got a ton of books here I want to share with you, and it's a really eclectic selection today. It's eclectic both in subject matter, but it's also eclectic in my response to them. No, I've enjoyed them all. Anyway, let's just dive in. Like I said, really eclectic. First couple I'm going to go through really quickly because I want to focus on the others. And I'm sure as I chat about these, it's going to throw up all sorts of other stuff as well. It's never as simple as a as a book review with me, is it? And let's just first of all take out reams of notes I wrote on this first one. This was sent to me from Judith. Thank you, Judith. A year more ago. It's been sitting on my shelf waiting for ages. It's Laurens van der Post's Venture into the Interior. Now, goodness me, this is a book that is so familiar to me. Let me just see when this one was. This is obviously a reprint, masses and masses. So this was the 1988 reprint by Penguin. So this specific kind of cover design, this edition, it's so familiar to me because I think this was the cover design edition that went through the 90s as well. This is a book that would turn up at my bookshop at least once a month. Every month, you know, someone bring in a big box of books, or we go to someone's house where they've got a whole library they're wanting to sell, and there would invariably be a copy of Venture into the Interior in there somewhere. Occasionally I sold it as a first edition, but yeah, it's one of those books. It was always around. It generally ended up on the pound shelves. I think it was so massively in circulation. Let me just see, because it was first published in 52 in Penguin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So by 1988, this edition, it had 15 print runs. That's massive. That's absolutely massive. So when Judith sent it to me, I thought, oh yeah, Laurens van der Post, Journey into the Interior. Yeah, okay, I'll pop it on the shelf. I'll read it at some point. But when I came to sit down to read it, it occurred to me that I had absolutely no idea, no preconceptions. What is this book about? Yeah, I know it's about Africa, some part of Africa, but otherwise I approached it as a complete blank slate, which is great in a way. I had no sort of prejudice. So, as an overall experience, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a sort of, for me, it was dipping into a sort of a type of reading that I haven't done for a long time. I've just got a draft around the back of my, the small of my back. Hang on a sec. I'm just going to shove that down there a bit. Yeah, it sort of dips into the sort of travel adventure books that I used to read so much of, that I loved. Why I never got around to this, I don't know. So it's sort of, it was dipping right back into that. So I was immediately sort of comfortable in that world of exploration. I know very little about Africa, say compared with Europe in terms of both geography, history, current affairs, ad infinitum. I know very, very little. So I was really keen to read it from that point of view. I thought, let's start having an adventure in Africa. And so from that point of view, brilliant as well. Loved it. This is new learning for me. But what I had to do, there are maps. Let me show you gotta have a book with maps. Hang on, it's page 88 if I remember off the top of my head. Oh no, page 82, not bad, because I read this about 3 weeks ago. So this is the area he's going to. Now, if you look at all the surrounding countries around that Lake Nyasa, I didn't recognise any of the countries. I was looking at the map and I thought, Portuguese East Africa, where the heck's Portuguese East Africa? Nyasaland, what's Nyasaland? But of course, it's written in 1952. He did the trip in 1949. Of course, all those names have changed. This is all the colonial names. So the first thing I did was I went and got my atlas out, and I translated all the names, like Tanganyika, Tanzania. Portuguese East Africa is Mozambique. Nyasaland is Malawi, and Northern Rhodesia, Zambia. So the minute I translated those names, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of know where that is roughly, and I know sort of topographically roughly a bit of what it looks like. And that kind of, in a way, that sort of sets the tone for the whole book, and some slight discomfort at times. He goes in 1949, so it's very soon after the Second World War, and that there are references to the war, there are references to some pretty tough stuff, but it's one of those things when we read a book written, so what's that, 70 plus years ago, we kind of have to remember the historical context in which it was written. There may be language which, for us reading now, feels a bit like, oh, God, that's a bit inappropriate or insensitive or whatever. Not from Van der Post. I always got the sense, I made a note of it even, I always got, what did I say? I made a note that by the end of it, I got the feeling that he was a sensitive and deeply thoughtful man. So it's not necessarily his views that are all difficult, it's more that he's a man in a time where those were the views around him, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I think it's, from an historical point of view, it's kind of interesting, and I think we should know about these things. Essentially, he's gone to explore 2 areas in what is now Malawi. He's sent by the British government. Why? Because, of course, the British government think this area hasn't been explored. Is there something there that we can exploit? And that's the bottom line with it all, is the Brits want to go there and say, oh, can we, is it fertile land that we can farm? Is it land where there is timber that we can fell and sell, essentially? That's what it's about. It's about sending someone over there to see what can we, financially, how can we gain from this bit of land that hasn't been explored. That's the tough pill to swallow when reading a book like this. I acknowledge that, I don't like it, and I try to then focus on the other aspects of, oh, this is an amazing land. So the other thing to bear in mind is what seems crazy. I loved the first part of the book when he's actually making the journey there because, and I wrote some of these bits down too, he travels by plane from Heathrow. Now we call it Heathrow, one word. He writes about Heath, one word, row, a second word. And it takes him, and he's basically heading down to Kenya, and then I think he goes overland. Or did I stop making notes at Kenya? But this is the crazy thing. It's almost 24 hours for him to get to Kenya on 3 different flights. So the first flight goes to Tunisia. And this is where I was like, hang on, I had to stop and kind of Google this one. From Heathrow to Tunisia, and I'm sure some of you have been on holiday to Tunisia, it's a 3-hour flight. When he was doing it in 1952, it was an 8-hour flight. It was just amazing. So 8 hours to Tunisia, another 8 hours down to Khartoum, and then a further 8 hours to Kenya. So it was 24 hours of flying to get to Kenya. And that helped to set it in the context of the time as well. It's, you know, and he's going to a place that hasn't been mapped properly. And of course now we take it for granted that we have all this sort of satellite imaging of pretty much the whole planet. It seems impossible to our modern minds that even as recently as 1952 there could be a part of the globe that hasn't been mapped. So it's fascinating from that point of view. But it is there's one really shocking event in it, a really shocking and upsetting event. And I'm not giving anything away by saying that, he lays that seed, he puts that seed in our mind quite early on that he's got a bad feeling. So I kind of, by the end of it, I felt very much that, to sum it up, how to say it? Sorry, I'm being really inarticulate. Maybe I need some chocolate, that's what I need. It's a book of contrast for me. Dark and light, good and evil, kill or be killed, as brutal as that. As a book in a historical, I will never know. What would it have been like for me to read that if I was reading it in 1952? It would just probably be a jolly jape, you know? Oh, let's go and have a jolly jape in Africa. Let's go and find somewhere that's undiscovered to us. But reading it in 2023, there were some parts I found so difficult, but it was really, really interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed Venture into the Interior. The bits which were sort of pure exploration, yeah, loved that. The travel to Africa, that was fascinating. I couldn't get over the amount of time it had taken, but also the sort of the politics around the whole colonialism and that sort of reflections on the war. I think it was an important thing for me to read. I'm so glad I read it. Thank you, Judith. Where to put it? I will now pass it on to someone else who I think will, I'm not sure actually. Excuse me a sec. Oh, I've got, is that skin or did I not stir it all properly? God, that's gorgeous. Hot chocolate on a cold, wet day. That I'm looking at again, that snow has now turned to, I can't quite see whether it's sleet or rain from here. Yeah, with the Lawrence van der Post, it's a tricky book. I'm not sure, I can't think of any of my friends offhand immediately who I think they'd really enjoy it. I really like having books coming out of left field at me. I really like reading older books from time to time. I mean, it's not old. 70 years isn't old in terms of the history of books, but I just mean in terms of political history. 70 years is a long time in politics, isn't it? So I was going to say, I think we should read books like that. Do whatever you want, read whatever books you want. For me, I think I should read books like that. Hang on, I'm just going to glug this now. Otherwise it'll go cold. I feel like I've got it all around my mouth now, have I? I've got a chocolate tash. Right, moving on. And this is another really challenging one. I'm not going to spend too long on it because it really was challenging. It's the one that Jane sent me. Islands of Abandonment. Abandonment. In a nutshell, this is areas where humans have been and been active. Quite often it's industrial activity, and then for whatever reason that place has been abandoned, the humans have moved off. Has nature reclaimed it? And as Jane said when she sent it to me, look, you see what my bookmarks are? I've marked a few pages, but this is really naughty. This page is marked, there's a few pages marked with, can you see what it is? That's tin foil from a bar of chocolate. That chocolate's warmed me up, that Pat sent. Yeah, as Jane said, at times it's depressing and at times hopeful. I think overall I found it incredibly bleak, frightening, worrying, depressing. Why am I even talking about it to you? But again, I think it's an important book to read. There is hope from time to time, and by golly, we need it. Does the hope in this book, and in life, does the hope outweigh the gloom in here? Frankly, for me, no, it didn't. You know, as much as, you know, some kind of individual who says, yes, I'm gonna sort of save this area, or we're gonna go litter picking on the beach today, whatever it is, that bit of hope from that one person, that one researcher, that one kind of pioneer scientist who's trying to fix things, it just feels like a drop in a massive ocean. Yeah, I really struggled with this. I found it so difficult. I mean, there were times, I'll be honest, there were times I put the book down. I'm going to do it now, try not to. There were times I put the book down and I cried with despair of the damage we've done. But I don't want to go on a neggy today, so let's not. But I'm glad I read it because, you know, ignorance does not equal bliss. Ignorance is not an excuse. There were some where there were those pockets of hope. Look, the whole book was a really fascinating read. There was some stuff in here that I knew, and in terms of like the less gloomy bits. So, for instance, how the buffer zone in Cyprus, how that is rewilding. So I'm reading about that and I'm thinking, well, yay, because it's not sort of industrial waste, chemical waste that is going to be in the soil or the rivers forever and ever, sort of thing. But then even reading about that, it's like, oh my goodness, but yeah, I'm not going to go on about Cyprus. That's a very divisive subject. What did I mark the pages for? Is there something I wanted to... Sorry. Hang on a sec, let me see if I can remember. Faith in the end is what environmental... I think this is why I've bookmarked this page. Faith in the end is what environmentalism boils down to. Faith in the possibility of change. The prospect of a better future for green shoots from the rubble and fresh water in the desert, and our faith is often tested. And I think that's, it's a really, for me, that was an incredibly gloomy, difficult book. But even so, by the end of it, that idea of faith, I do have faith. I have faith in nature. That's one thing. But I also have faith in human beings that we will start to do the right things, and we will in future, that we will learn from these utter catastrophes we've created, that we'll learn from that and we won't do it again. You know what, in the same way, in a way that, and you know, I hope it's true for this, that all the terrible things that were done in the colonial years, that we don't, that I think that's what I mean about reading books like this, is we don't, you know, we don't go through life with blinkers. We don't shut out the past and try to pretend it didn't happen. We acknowledge it, and we acknowledge our terrible mistakes or our terrible hurts and injuries that we did to others, and learn from it and say, never again. And I think, colonialism and creating environmental catastrophes. So there is a glimmer of hope. So, sorry, have I made you all miserable? I don't want to. And now we come on to some really happy clappy stuff. I am generally an optimist. And anyone who's watched for a while will know that, you know, I would say always, I'm trying to find the positives in things, and I try to get out of doldrums and all that sort of thing. But the fact is, life isn't happy clappy all the time. So I'm not going to be happy clappy all the time. I'm going to talk about these things. Then I was having a chat with my sister on the phone. I was kind of halfway through Islands of Abandonment. It's like, oh God. So the other thing to say very quickly, at about this time last year, about the end of February actually, I counted up the books, because you remember we were all kind of diving into our no-spend year. And I hadn't started talking about that until the end of February. I kind of missed the boat in January. But anyway, I said, I'm not going to buy any books this year. This is last year now. Looking over there now. And I counted 52 unread books on my shelf. And I thought, well, that's great, isn't it? That's a book a week for a year. And in fact, during the winter, I tend to read, I sometimes get through 3 books in a week, sometimes 2. But actually then in the summer, I read very little, if at all, just because everything at the garden kicks off. And I get busy with that. So I thought, that'll do me. Then over the course of the year, I reckon, I was trying to work it out the other night, I must have been sent about 20 books over the course of the year, either by some of you, by friends, by family. So by the end of the year, it would have been, by the start of last year, so it was more like 72 books. I counted up the other day, and that's why we're coming on to this. I think I've only got 11 unread books on my shelf. Oh, running out of books. I'm not saying please don't send me any books. Please don't send me any books, because I will feel obliged to read them straight away, and I'm coming into the time of year when I don't have much time to read, unfortunately. And a lot of the ones I've got left, they're all sort of like agriculture, farming, British countryside, so there's not much variation in what I've got left on the shelf. And I didn't quite fancy, I was in Islands of Abandonment, and I thought, I can't face reading about farming at the moment, I don't know what I want. Chatting to my sister, and she mentioned this author, really rated her, so I thought, well, okay, next time I'm at the second-hand bookshop, I'll see if there's any of her books on the shelf. I'm not massively fussed to buy any, because firstly it's fiction, and I really hardly ever do fiction. but also I thought, is it going to be a bit chick lit? Because that's so not me. And I should have known better because it's my sister. She doesn't really, well, no, she doesn't do chick lit either. Anyway, so a couple of days later, I was in my second-hand place and they had 3 or 4 books by this author, and I fished this one out for specifically. I have now finished it, and you know what? I blooming loved it. What a revelation. So, the author I'm talking about, and I absolutely know that a ton of you will have read her. Whoopla. Victoria Hislop. So the one my sister was reading, or that she had read, or she was about to, I think she's read 2 or 3, but she was talking about the island. And I think it's like an ex-leper colony. And when she was talking about it, I thought, God, that sounds depressing. Bear in mind, I'm in the middle of Islands of Abandonment, which was dead depressing. But worth it, you know, intellectually worth it. And I thought, oh no. So I looked on the shelf and I saw The Island and I went, oh no, I can't, I really need something lighter. Well, this did the trick. Carte postale, which is French for postcard. You can tell it's set in Greece. But what I love, I'm going to have to come up to the camera to show you, if I can. I'm going to try and flip through it. So it's full of pictures, photographs, and then each chapter, you see that's the back of a postcard, that's the front of the postcard. And then do you see how, not show you that one, see how some pages, it looks like they're typed in a notebook, and then other pages are typed as the book. Let me show you the beginning of. So you'll get, there's pages from a notebook, and then we get a little airmail sticker, and then after the airmail sticker, a postcard. That's the back of the postcard, and then the story that relates to the postcard. It's a fantastic premise. It's a great device. I mean, it's a classic, brilliant fiction device. So the premise is, our lass, we start with this lass, and actually don't worry too much about her because it's not her story. She lives in a flat in London, and postcards keep arriving to her flat from a guy to another lass. They're short, they're sweet, they're sort of, and there's the notebook that we then get. It's almost like trying to do a facsimile, but yeah, these postcards keep arriving from a guy, and he's in different places in Greece. He's all over the place in Greece. Also, the obligatory map. I love a map. Oh my goodness. Couldn't we all do with being in Greece right now? In the sunshine, in the warmth. Give me eye tooth. So the postcards keep coming, they keep coming, and then they stop. And she's like, oh, I'm kind of starting to miss them now. And by the way, this is all very much just a tiny, tiny part at the beginning before we get into the adventure. And then the notebook turns up. This notebook, page after page after page. Just before the notebook turns up, she decides, kind of spur of the moment, I'm going to go to Greece. I'm going to go to this place because he's made me fall in love with it through the postcards and his words. So off she goes to Greece. And I think she books a 2-week holiday. And basically through the 2-week holiday, she reads the notebook. So all of her story, in a way, it's just a premise, it's a setup. She comes back right at the end. It ties up nicely at the end. But, so the premise is, the guy who's written the postcards, it's his notebook. He's been keeping a notebook, a journal, as he's been wandering around Greece. And the premise is, I'm not giving anything away by this, that the postcards he's been sending to this woman that he's fallen in love with, and they were supposed to meet on a certain day at a certain airport in Greece, and she doesn't show up. So he's writing to her to say, well, now I've moved on to such and such a town. It's him getting over his heartbreak. So he starts travelling all around Greece, And this is why it's a brilliant device. Victoria Hislop is obviously a massive Greekophile. And by having him travelling around the country, he can arrive in a town when it's a certain festival for that particular town. It's almost like a tour guide to Greece. Because we go to these different towns, he describes the architecture, the festivals that are going on, the food they're eating there, for example. What are their customs, what's unique for each town. So it's like a little travelogue. He goes to these different towns. But it's also a wonderful collection of short stories. I didn't count them up actually. There's got to be 20, maybe more in that, maybe 20. So when he goes to each town, the device is that he'll say, oh, I was sitting at a restaurant last night or a cafe in the afternoon, and I got talking to a local, and they told me the story of what happened here 50 years ago. Cue a postcard, and then we get the story of what happened 50 years ago. So we never have a really huge deep dive into her story, the girl in London, or even his story, the guy who's written the journal. Rather, it's a collection of vignettes of characters from all different towns and different parts of Greece. Some of it is, what did I write down? Oh yeah, some of the stories are there's some brutal stuff in there. There's some sad stuff. There's some heartbreak sad stuff. There's some kind of a bit weird, mysterious, spooky stuff in there. Oh yeah, and I made a note to myself that ultimately all the stories throughout, they all feel just very slightly faded. They're like old postcards, the stories themselves. They're like postcards which have been put in an old shoebox and forgotten for 50 years, or the postcards we see outside, you know, a little tatty shop on a seafront, and they've not got any new stock in of their postcards for years and years. So the cards have faded in the sunshine, they've curled at the edges. That kind of feels how each of these little stories feel, that somehow they're sort of going out of focus. They just, we can't quite reach them, but they feel so real. There's a lovely device as well that she's used through using his voice, that he says, oh, you know, I'm not quite sure how many of these stories that were told to me are true, how many have been exaggerated. So all the time I was reading it, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if that village really does exist, the weird one. I wonder if that really does exist. I wonder if they still do that now. Was it real? Is this based on a real thing? Because so much of it, I mean, I adore Greece. I absolutely adore. But I mean, you say Greece. Greece is a big place. It's very, you know, whether you're on an island or the mainland, whether you're in the Peloponnese or you're up, you know, Halkidiki, it's very different. But as a kind of globally, I adore the place. And throughout it, I kept thinking, oh yes, I know that character. I can picture that character. I can picture that place. Loads of the places. And he knows a lot of the places I've actually been to. So that was a wonderful, wonderful kind of, I'm reading a story, but I'm also reliving my own past. Absolutely fab. That gorgeous Greek hospitality comes pouring out of the pages. So it was a wonderful, wonderful diversion after the doom and gloom of the Islands of Abandonment. It was a wonderful diversion, really, just a really joyful, fun way to create a book and to take us on a journey in this sort of novel way of, some parts were the stories from the regions, some parts were the stories from his journal, notebook. Some parts are her bit of the story. The lasses come from London, and it all does tie up at the end. Yeah, I got to the end and I did not want it to end. I was loving it. This to me was me reading this a week or so ago on a gloomy, grey, grotty day in London, but here, tucked up in my quilt. This was like me having a summer love affair, you know, a 2-week summer holiday romance reading this book. It was just joyful. It felt utterly indulgent and wonderful. I highly recommend it. She's a great writer. Just shy of being a literary writer. I don't think she's going to win any literary prizes, but absolutely, well written for a page turner. And the visual aspect of the book. Let me try and find you some gorgeous. Well, they're all. I don't want to part with it. I'm going to send this to my sister because I don't think she's read this one. I can't find a picture I want to show you now, but just so much of it if you are a Greekophile, if you've spent much time in Greece, any time in Greece, some of it will just feel instantly recognisable and familiar and glorious. So I'm about to get lost in this again, which is incredibly selfish and indulgent of me while I've got the camera turned on. That's not fair on you all, but yeah, slight decay. There was a little bit about decay really early on, and after having read the other book about decay, I thought, no more decay. I can't cope with decay. Read it. It's fab. Right. Keeping an eye on the clock. Rattling on. English pastoral. I've mentioned it before. The James Rebanks. Loved it. But again, there's some tricky stuff in it. So, oh my goodness. There are 3 parts to the book. It's in 3 parts, and in a way, yes, each part actually represents a generation in a way. So the whole of the first third of the book is his memories from when he's a boy, which was in the 80s, early 80s, and it's all about him and his granddad's farm. So his granddad's got the farm on the fell. They've got a farm. They've got their own farm separately. But yeah, it's him with his granddad, it's him learning the farming trade. But of course his granddad farms a bit old school, just that sort of post-war farming. So he's converted from horse to tractor by then, of course, but he's still quite old school. Then the middle section is more about his dad's farming, so we kind of come into the 90s and how his dad is farming. And the final third of the book is now James has taken over the farm. Both his father and his grandfather have died by now, and it's his method of farming. And essentially, that's why I say I'm a bit gloomy, because the first third of the book, that old school farming, I think it's the kind of farming that we all think of when we think of farming in an English countryside. It's rather more bucolic and lovely. The middle third, it is the gloomy bit. The final third is more hopeful, but the middle section, it's that huge change that starts to take place in the 80s and 90s in British farming, where farms are encouraged to become more productive, essentially by farming more intensively. Buy bigger machines, buy bigger this, buy bigger that, have many more heads per herd. And it's the move away from the small mixed farming to these monolith, massive monoculture, monocrop farms, and how utterly devastating that has been. So again, kind of like the Islands of Abandonment, I've got loads of pages marked in here too. This one, I mean, look, I massively recommend it. It's a massive subject that I don't think I've got time. I'm just looking at the clock. I've not got time for today. I'm not going to dive into it today. That middle section, it does get into, it's massively about politics as well, power, money, the massive food corporations. It looks at the model in the Midwest in the States. It's pretty sad and dreadful and depressing. It's pretty awful. And again, he's talking about this ecological disaster that we've created. And it's not, we're talking facts. We're not just doing like, oh, I'm a hippie and I think you're hurting the land. So but throughout the whole thing, and it's so beautifully and eloquently written, throughout the whole thing, we are continually being reminded that, farmers are not bad, they are not evil, but nor are they, oh, good and hippie and la, they need to make money. It's all about how can we have a way of farming in which farmers can do what they really love, which is tending for the land, for being good stocksmen and women, and for being fantastic, soil husbandry. How can they do that and still make a living? How can they earn a living with small mixed farming when the supermarkets and above are demanding that they wipe it all out, and they end up with so many heads of cattle that they can't possibly be grazed. They have to be brought into barns, and suddenly it's just factory farming. Okay, this isn't a political rant from me. This is just looking at it. So it's really, really well balanced, that it's not about a blame culture, but it is, we do have to acknowledge where we've gone wrong and how we can right it. And that's the final third of the book. Thank goodness, hallelujah, is he starts turning his farm that had been his father's, he starts turning it back into a small mixed farm of how we can sort of bring the soil back to life. And how, it's all of it, it's about long processes, no instant results, but how can we, he talks at one point about going back into the 90s where there's a tractor ploughing. It's a massive one in one of the big farms. They've gone big farm, big fields, and as it's ploughing, his dad points and says, look, there are no seagulls following the tractor, because as it's turning the soil is dead. There's no life in the soil. There are no worms. There's nothing for the birds to swoop down and grab. Whereas when he'd been a lad, you're out ploughing, you're always followed by a gaggle of seagulls or other birds as they're swooping down to grab the worms as the soil is being turned over. So it's it's a really, really interesting book. I loved it, loved it, because it's, in a way, it's a history of British agriculture for the last 50 years. It is hopeful. Again, it's going to take a lot of people to convert back, and all the way through I was thinking, well, what can we do? How can we support farmers to do that? And how can we once again enjoy seeing barn owls swooping over our fields at night, because there are so many voles in the field, because there's enough to sustain the voles, etc. ad infinitum. Some fantastic write-ups on the back. Isabel Tree said, one of the most important books of our time. A heartfelt elegy for all that has been lost from our landscape, and a rousing disquisition on what could be regained. Some books change our world. I hope this turns out to be one of them. Sunday Times put it brilliantly on the front cover. Eloquent, persuasive and electric with the urgency that comes out of love. So yeah, it's not about being angry and blaming, but it's about saying, what can we do? What can we do? Because we love this place. We want to work with the land. And me as a consumer, I want to eat healthy stuff. I don't mean like, oh, eat. What I mean is I want to eat. When I say healthy, I don't mean my health. I mean the health of the countryside. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I have got a copy in the shop. I might pop this one in there as well if none of my friends fancy it. Oh my goodness, it's going to be a long one today. Sorry for any of those who don't like long ones. I can't ever do a short one. So quickly, on to the end. Now, I think this book may be my book of the year. Yeah, already chosen. Blooming loved it. The Man Who Made Things Out of Trees, Robert Penn. What a great title. Bit of a misnomer. It should be called The Man Who Got Other People to Make Things Out of Trees for Him. In a nutshell, he fells an ash tree. And each chapter is a different crafts person, a different skill turning it into something. I mean, we can see on the cover there's not a shinty stick, a hurling stick, a spoon, an axe handle, an arrow shaft, a baseball bat, an oar, a tent peg, a bowl. Has been, oh my God, I'm giddy. And also there are illustrations in it to help us understand when, for instance, let me see if I can find you one. So this like the anatomy of wood and it making cuts where are my pictures? I can't find them now, how they make the cuts. This book it's history, it's art, it's craft, it's rural life, it's sport. I mean, it's got everything in here that I love. So I feel so much. I mean, I think we take wood and trees for granted. Well, I certainly, as I was reading it, I thought I really do take wood and trees for granted. And just how much wood has been part of our lives. I know, it's silly, isn't it? But what I loved is, when he goes to the arrow maker, we go back in time. We're looking at Agincourt, Crecy, all those battles then, and the people who were making them, how they were made, etc. Tool handles. We've all got hand tools and tools with handles made from ash, surely. We get into sport. He was talking, the baseball bats are obvious ones. Wooden tennis rackets, and reminded me that the very last all wooden racket final at Wimbledon has gone down in history as probably one of the best finals at Wimbledon ever, and that was, of course, 1980, Borg versus McEnroe, the last final to be played with a wooden racket each. I mean, it's sort of everywhere. So I loved it. It's incredibly eclectic, but every page I was reading felt there was something about it that I already knew and that I was familiar with, but I also learned loads more. It was fab. There's also a chunk in there about, ash. Ash seems to be like the best tree because it does everything. But there's a bit of talk in there about elm, because of course elm traditionally we used for chair seats because elm doesn't split. I think it was elm. Now this is my own historical knowledge, it's not in here, but there is talk about what it meant to us to lose so many elm in the late 70s because of Dutch elm disease. And now there are problems with ash. There are two issues. I think there's a borer and there's a fungal issue. And I think in the UK and Europe, the issue is the borer. I may have got it. Don't take my word for it. Anyway, that's also covered in here. So it feels like the whole world in one little book. And what I loved was all the different, he goes to a wheelwright, so they make a cart wheel. I'm going to just go to the in the end papers, I don't know if you can make out here, and in the other end paper, the list carries on. It's all the things he made from one tree. A desk, he makes a desk. Well, he doesn't, like I said, he gets people to make them for him. So he visits all sorts of people, so that it's like a bit of travel. You know, even things like right at the beginning, choosing the perfect tree. Actually, the chapter titles don't really help me to remember all the different people he went to see, but it was gorgeous. I felt like I was going and meeting these craft people with him, and some of them are very much they're sort of almost like, you know, dying arts, what we think of as dying arts, dying crafts, like the wheelwright, what have you. But then others, like when he visits the guys who are making the baseball bats, he's over in the States, that, you know, people will never stop making baseball bats, although they may have to stop making them from ash. People are using more maple now, but apparently for the league players, like the pros, it's still in their rules that they have to use an ash bat. But yeah, meeting these people, what comes through the pages is this absolute love for the work they do. Someone did once say, didn't they? I don't know whoever said it, but if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Who said that? Because it's true, isn't it? If you love what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work. You're doing it. Of course, you need to get paid for it, but that's what comes through from all these brilliant, skilled, highly skilled people. In some cases, they're doing a job which there's maybe only 2 or 3 other people in the country left doing it. And hopefully they will find someone that they can apprentice, so that they can pass these skills on to. So a sense of love for the work they do, but love for the material, respect for the material, respect for our woodlands and how we need to look after them and manage them. Plant more trees. We need to be, we're always a couple of generations away. We're always planting for someone else. When we plant a tree, it's not for us, it's for someone in the next generation. It was so beautiful. Like I said, it's the perfect book for me because it just touches on everything: art, craft, sport, history, nature, and love for working with our hands, creating, just us and a material, creating something from it. No factory nonsense, no robots, no digital, none of that, all that stuff that I can't stand. Back to basics. Oh, I adored it. And while I was reading it, I was thinking, when I move, I have lost one of my kitchen chairs, like dining chairs. When I move, and I would like to buy another chair, because if I have more than 2 people come and visit me, they ain't nowhere to sit, is to look around in, obviously I'll try and pick it up second hand, but I'd like to find, a handmade chair, an English country chair. It might cost a lot of money, but you know what, I'd rather, or even go to a maker, I would rather pay someone a lot of money to make something beautiful that will last forever-ish than something produced by robots in a factory. Anyway, yeah, I loved it. Read it. If you see a copy, I'll put... Oh, I was going to say I'm going to put this in the shop. I don't know. I've got a feeling I might want to read it again at some point. Utterly fascinating. Utterly. I feel like I learned so much. Brilliant. Loved it. Right, looking at the clock, that is a really long one. I apologise. Look, it's a grotty day. What better than just curl up on the sofa with me and let's chat books and hot chocolate and what else, la-di-da. I see you again soon, I hope. And now that I'm getting the sewing out of the way, get on with that, then I can start, I can move on to the kitchen, wait for the weather to clear up, get out to the garden. There's tons to do, but for now, back to the sewing. All right, gorgeosities, see you all again soon. If you've hung out with me for the whole of this session, thank you. I appreciate your time. Oh, I'm getting cold. Right, I need to move. See you all soon, I hope. Until then, cheerio.